I'm here to tell a story that's more relatable to you than you might think, a story with a call to action. So back then, during my father's high school days in Jakarta, before he and his friends would get together for practice, they'd typically head down to the neighborhood warung. And what's a warung, you might wonder? Well, these are typically mom-and-pop stores which sell drinks, sweets, rice crackers. But the crown jewel on this warung in particular was the keripik, which are Indonesian spicy crisps. This keripik would be a medium of barter among the students for notes and homework and all of that. They really cherished it as much as we cherish our ham and cheese paninis here at Caterham. And so at this warung typically would be a middle-aged auntie who would be the warung keeper. And next to her would be this small boy who would help out. So if someone paid with a slightly larger note, for example, he'd have to run down a few blocks to get some change. And so a packet of this keripik back then was 50 Indonesian rupiah, which, when we account for inflation, is roughly 11 pence today. And a student back then, like my father, would typically have 100 to 150 rupiah. And so a packet of these keripik would be at least a third of his income. But this is Indonesia, so of course there'd naturally be a lot of room for interaction and negotiation. And typically what they do is they'd go in groups, and they'd say to the auntie, "Oh, we'll pay for 3, you give us 1 in return." And it'd also be pretty common for these warungs to sell on credit. So for things like cigs and snacks, for friends and regulars, it'd be pretty common to keep tabs like you would do in bars. And so another prized possession of this warung would be the bakmi goreng, which is an Indonesian fried noodle dish. This was served in banana leaves with peanut chili oil sauce poured on top called the sambal kacang. And this was always served in a leaky plastic bag with grease dropping all over it. And actually more precious than the noodles itself was the sambal kacang. Once it was out, it was out. So my father remembers that people would race to the warung. There'd always be a small bustling crowd formed in front of it. And that it wasn't uncommon at all for fights to erupt over just this chili sauce. And he says that you knew what you were getting. This keripik and the mee would always be as good as you remembered it to be. When they all went back to school for the 20-year reunion, the warung itself was gone, and all they could talk about was how good that keripik and how good that mee was. And I think that shows how deeply rooted and ingrained this warung was in their hearts and in their minds. These warungs are very much personal, small-scale, family-owned businesses. You'd identify this warung with the auntie who ran it. Each warung in its own neighborhood carried its own sense of homeliness and nostalgia. And so for many Indonesians like my father, these warungs amounted to so much more than simple tuck shops. It's what he associated his childhood with, his environment, his fondest memories with his friends. At the heart of it all is that personal element, that character. Something about handing over that 50 rupiah to the auntie, which is something you wouldn't necessarily experience at a 7-Eleven. So what is it to me, you might wonder? Why do I care? Well, my father and his father and his father grew up and lived in Indonesia, but I come from Hong Kong. And typically once a year, I'd be staying with my grandparents in Jakarta. And it's during these brief stays that I'd notice all these very bizarre ways people were making a living. People who were offering these no infrastructure, illegitimate services just to get by. But I've actually come to appreciate how homely and iconic these Indonesian idiosyncrasies are. I'm comforted in knowing that every time I'm in Indonesia, I'll be able to head down the street and in that obscure spot, find my favorite one-man martabak warung. You see, these things are what Indonesia is all about for me. Now, Indonesia is Southeast Asia's largest and most promising economy. And it terrifies me, however, though, that one day people will no longer care for things like the martabak, things like the keripik, and that an even bigger problem yet is that these torchbearers, people like the warung aunties, will be left behind by the economy. It's important that we uplift and empower these communities, these torchbearers. While we want to retain as much of this beloved tradition as possible, we need to make sure that we innovate so that people can continue to live and love using these things, and that the people offering these services are able to lead better lives with better prospects. I'll show you that in the coming examples that understanding the market in a place like Indonesia is crucial, and that establishing networks and raising accessibility is what the most successful startups in Indonesia are doing to innovate from tradition. So let's go back to the example of warungs. In recent years, Jakarta specifically has been rapidly urbanizing. We're seeing that new office locations are springing up in all sorts of pockets of Jakarta, and that as a result, these warungs have become increasingly displaced or shut down. They're seen as untidy, backwards. These warungs have been the same for decades, and people like the boy and the warung auntie, they aren't getting better off. And so in such a time as this, we need to equip these micro-businesses with scale, efficiency, modernity. And several innovative startups like Warung Pintar, Bukalapak have done exactly this. They've innovated warungs. So they understand that Indonesian customers need and want things like free Wi-Fi, free charging capabilities. So they've given warungs this. Some even have phone top-up. And what this does is it keeps warungs functionally competitive and attracts youngsters to them. Another thing they're doing is that they're linking these warungs directly to producers so that, for example, these warungs can source their noodles for cheaper to make the bakmi goreng, and that they have higher profit margins. And equally as importantly, we're seeing e-payment systems, card readers, buy now, pay later. All of this is being introduced by these firms. And that raises accessibility, convenience, and ease with which Indonesians can interact at these warungs and spend at them. At the moment, we're seeing that warungs can live to serve a new generation of customers. Now, another aspect of the Indonesian way of life that I'd like to talk about is fishing. Some of you may know that Indonesia is a sprawling archipelago spanning thousands of miles, and that fishing is such a crucial part of Indonesian heritage. Fish is by far Indonesia's superfood, and it's the livelihood of many, many Indonesians. Personally, one of my favorite memories of Indonesia was when me and my family stayed in Bali for a wedding. And at night, we'd be in these wooden restaurants alongside the beach, and we'd be eating the freshest seafood caught by Bali fishermen who were maybe a couple hundred meters away, and it was just magical. Now, I'm sure many tourists have had such similar magical, unforgettable memories there. And it all sounds merry and well, but the sobering truth is that on the other side, these fishermen have been struggling for as long as we can remember. I'm talking about fishing villages that have been poor and left behind for centuries. People without access to healthcare who could only dream of sending their children to school. People who barely get by doing the only thing they know how to do, which is fishing. And in recent years, we're actually seeing that less and less Indonesians are becoming fishermen, precisely because they aren't making enough to survive. These are people who lack business skills, information about the market, any sort of technology. They often get scammed by brokers who force them to lower their prices. Fortunately, we're seeing that firms like Aruna are stepping in to bridge this gap, to innovate Indonesian fishery. What they've done is that they've established an online marketplace where these fishermen are finally able to sell directly to the customers. These are B2B and B2C networks on this online marketplace where they can sell to wholesalers, retailers, people like me and you who want to buy seafood. And as a result, they're getting much fairer prices for their catch. And we're also seeing that the people buying the seafood are getting better prices as well. We're also seeing that accessibility has risen substantially from this, that all transactions are being done on this online marketplace, and that people are going into these Indonesian villages helping these fishermen integrate technology into their daily lives and into their livelihoods. And as a result of firms like Aruna, we're finally seeing that things are starting to turn around for these Indonesian fishermen, that standards of living have gone up, that monthly wages have gone up 3 to 12 times. Now, there are countless other examples like this that I'd like to go on about, but for now, I'd like to move on to the social aspect of all of this. You may not realize, but all of this is social entrepreneurship. It's improving lives. When we innovate with identity at the heart of it all, we end up making a substantial, quantifiable social impact. It's not just something sentimental. All of these examples I've shown you have improved the lives of who they set out to help, whether it be motorcycle drivers or fishermen or families, the warung aunties. They've given them financial resilience, made their day-to-day wages more secure, and given the better prospects for their families. Now, you may be thinking that I'm cherry-picking my examples, that I'm only talking about the once-in-a-lifetime success stories, the billion-dollar IPOs that made it onto Wall Street. But I'm here to tell you that this is actually happening in all sorts of crazy ventures of varying sizes that innovate and celebrate Indonesian heritage. Let me give you an example that hits closer to home for me. So my aunt works with this humble social enterprise called Dua Anyam, which goes to remote Indonesian islands like Flores, and goes to these women villagers and upscales their tradition of basket weaving, which has been passed down for generations, to make products like sandals, baskets, tote bags, to be sold on their website. And this gives these women villagers access to a whole market within and out of Indonesia. But most importantly, it empowers them to financially support themselves with their own tradition. Now, what I'm trying to show you from this is that there are so many innovative ventures like this that may be outside of the public eye, but that improve livelihoods so much more than we realize. And I think these examples all show that identity is found in all sorts of crevices and the nooks and crannies of daily life, that in fact, all of them took something commonplace and thought to reimagine the way they worked. These were all visionaries who dared to innovate, who dared to improve, yet preserve the most quintessential Indonesian elements. They all understood the market they were in. They all established vital networks, and they raised accessibility with which Indonesians can interact with these traditions. Now, you may be wondering, what's the takeaway for all of us listening here who may not be Indonesian? Well, I think what's been done in Indonesia has been vastly impressive, that innovating on identity improves lives. It allows what we loved growing up with to be shared with our children and their children. And that these models have shown us that there's actually a whole ocean of ideas and opportunities that is waiting to be jumped on, and that every one of us should be encouraged to look and see. That's the first thing to do, looking and seeing. The founder of Warung Pintar saw that there was a warung that was about to be displaced, and he thought, why don't I work with that owner to tidy it up instead of watching it go? The founder of Aruna saw that there was massive potential along the coastline, but that these fishermen lacked access to information and to technology. And so I encourage everyone to just start actively paying attention. In today's world, it's so hard not to be distracted. So I want everyone to just pause from obsessively moving forward with life, and in the present ponder on what's something you'll be looking back on in 20 years' time and saying, how I missed that. What will you be talking about at your 20-year reunion? Start thinking about what everyday things you cherish. You know, what makes where you live home? What do you associate your own identity and your own upbringing with? What experiences make you, you? Then we can start thinking about what needs changing and how we can use what we have to innovate. Maybe what skill sets of yours could you employ? I'm telling you, you don't have to be any sort of genius, tech genius, or a mathematician. You could be a social media guru, an athlete, a chef, a community volunteer. Anyone who's passionate about anything and has their own particular skill set can innovate from tradition. Small ideas turn into big ones, and thanks to you, the world will get to know the wonderful things that made you, you. Thanks very much.